Christmas used to feel like proof that I still belonged, even when I could already sense I didn't. My name is Delaney Brooks, and for as long as I can remember, I have lived on the edge of my own family, smiling at the right moments, shrinking when necessary. That night, my sister was handed keys to a new house and a brand new Tesla. The room exploded with joy. Then I opened my gift, a $2 lottery ticket, and somehow that tiny piece of paper was about to change everything. Long before money ever entered the picture in a dramatic way, the structure inside our home had already been decided. It wasn't written down anywhere. No one gathered us in the living room and explained the rules. But I learned them anyway. I learned them in the pauses, in the way voices shifted depending on which daughter they were speaking to. Harper never had to ask twice. If she mentioned an interest music lessons, a new laptop, a trip with friends, Mom's schedule would bend around it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Appointments were rearranged, budgets were reconsidered, energy was redirected. It didn't look dramatic from the outside. It looked supportive, loving, attentive, and maybe it was. But when I asked for something similar, the temperature changed. The conversation slowed down. I was told to be patient, to understand timing, to think about the bigger picture. If Harper's requests were treated like investments, mine were treated like inconveniences that required negotiation. Dad handled it differently, but the outcome was the same. With Harper, he leaned in, he asked follow-up questions, he offered strategy. He treated her concerns like projects worth solving. I remember watching them at the kitchen table, heads close together, mapping out her future like it was something solid and guaranteed. When I sat at that same table, the tone shifted. My questions were met with life lessons instead of solutions. Responsibility, gratitude, perspective. Words that sounded wise but always seemed to end the conversation instead of building one. It took me years to realize that guidance and dismissal can sometimes wear the same face. Money made the contrast sharper. If Harper wanted to try something new, there was always room in the budget. Somehow the numbers stretched. Somehow it made sense. When I asked for resources, help with a course, support for a plan, I had carefully thought through. The conversation became philosophical. Was I sure? Had I considered all the risks? Was this really necessary right now? No one ever used the word favoritism. They didn't need to. Patterns speak louder than labels. Birthdays were another quiet lesson. Harper's gifts were thoughtful, specific, wrapped in excitement. You could feel the anticipation in the room before she even opened them. There was pride in the giving, like her happiness validated the effort. My gifts were never cruel. They just felt completed, checked off, as if the task had been fulfilled and we could now return to what truly mattered. I would thank them, of course. I always thank them. I became very good at gratitude. Celebrations told the same story. When Harper achieved something good, grades, a promotion, even a small milestone, the house filled with noise, calls were made, photos were shared. There was a warmth that spread from room to room. When I achieved something similar, the acknowledgement was polite. Brief, that's nice. Good job. Just long enough to prove they had noticed before. Attention drifted back to her orbit. At first I tried to close the gap. I spoke up when something felt unfair. I asked questions when decisions didn't make sense. But every time I did, the response trained me a little more. I was too sensitive. I was overthinking. I needed to stop comparing. If I expressed frustration, I was ungrateful. If I pushed harder, I was creating tension. And tension in our house was treated like a personal failure. So I adapted. I learned that silence created peace. Not peace for me, but peace for everyone else. And that was enough to earn approval. When I stayed quiet, I was easy. When I didn't challenge anything, I was mature. When I absorbed disappointment without comment, I was understanding. Those words felt like rewards at the time. What I didn't understand yet was that I was being conditioned to shrink. I began editing my thoughts before they left my mouth. I would rehearse a sentence internally and then decide it wasn't worth the shift it might cause in the room. I stopped bringing up needs unless they were unavoidable. Even then, I framed them carefully, softening the edges so they wouldn't sound like demands. Over time, I stopped expecting equal treatment. That was the real shift. Not anger, not rebellion, just acceptance. It became easier to assume that Harper's needs were necessary while mine were optional. That her future required structure and planning while mine would work itself out. I heard that phrase more times than I can count. It sounded optimistic. It wasn't. When conversations turned toward the future, Harper's path was mapped with confidence. Internships were discussed, career moves were analyzed. There was strategy behind every step, like she was walking on a bridge that had already been built ahead of her. When my future came up, it was abstract, vague encouragement. You'll figure it out. You've always been independent. Independence wasn't a compliment. It was an expectation. It meant I would require less. And slowly I believed that too. I stopped waiting for someone to lean in the way they leaned in with her. I stopped anticipating guidance. I started telling myself that maybe this was just how families worked, that maybe I was asking for too much by wanting the same level of attention. The most dangerous part wasn't the inequality itself, it was the doubt. There were moments when I questioned my own perception. Was I exaggerating? Was I interpreting things through insecurity? Harper never seemed to notice a problem. My parents certainly didn't acknowledge one. The system functioned smoothly for them. The only reason I didn't fully lose trust in myself was because someone outside of that house listened. My best friend Olivia would sit with me and let me finish my thoughts without interrupting. She didn't rush to defend anyone. She didn't tell me to be quieter for the sake of harmony. She remembered details that mattered more than I realized at the time. Because inside my home, details about me often disappeared. Outside of it, someone was paying attention. That contrast forced me to see the pattern clearly. What I was experiencing wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a hierarchy that had been reinforced daily through tone, timing, and choice. And the longer it existed, the more natural it felt. I learned how to sit at the edge of rooms without drawing attention to myself. I learned how to smile when conversations passed over me. I learned how to measure my worth by how little space I required. Silence became a shield. If I didn't ask, I couldn't be denied. If I didn't expect, I couldn't be disappointed. If I didn't compete, I couldn't lose. That mindset protected me in small ways, but it also shaped me into someone who believed that love had to be earned through compliance. Looking back, I don't think my parents ever woke up and decided to treat us differently. I think they followed instinct, preference, comfort, Harper fit the version of daughter they understood best. I became the adaptable one, the manageable one. And when a family system rewards one role consistently, it becomes very hard to step outside of it without being seen as the problem. So I stayed where they placed me, not because I didn't see it, but because challenging it felt like risking the little connection I still had. That was the hierarchy long before any lottery ticket existed. Long before money turned quiet patterns into something impossible to ignore. It was built in daily decisions, in who was prioritized, in who was corrected, in who was celebrated, and in who learned that being small was safer than being seen. Moving out didn't happen with slammed doors or tearful goodbyes. There was no dramatic argument that pushed me out into the world. It was quieter than that. Quieter and somehow more final. Boxes were folded, clothes were sorted, papers were signed. No one asked me to stay. That was the part that settled in my chest more heavily than anything else. There were no speeches about how the house wouldn't be the same without me. No reassurances that I could always come back. Just a calm acceptance, as if my leaving fit neatly into a plan that had already made space for my absence. I found a small place I could afford on my own. Nothing impressive, just enough. I signed the lease without co-signers, paid the deposits from my own savings, and carried each box up the stairs myself. The first night sitting on the floor, because I hadn't bought furniture yet, I felt something unexpected. Not loneliness, ownership. For the first time, every responsibility belonged entirely to me. Rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, medical bills. If something broke, I fixed it. If something ran low, I replaced it. There was no one to lean on, but there was also no one to shrink around. The pressure was real. Some months were tighter than others. I worked longer hours without announcing it. I learned to budget carefully, sometimes obsessively. I tracked expenses. I avoided unnecessary risks. I made sure every bill was paid on time, not because anyone was watching, but because I refused to become the version of myself they might have expected. Irresponsible, dependent, overwhelmed. There was a quiet dignity in that discipline. I stopped asking for help entirely, not out of pride, but out of clarity. I already knew what the answer would be. So instead of setting myself up for disappointment, I built a system that didn't require approval. I handled problems before they became visible. I carried stress without advertising it. And strangely, the weight made me stronger. The distance between me and my family didn't grow through explosive fights. It grew through routine, through unanswered messages, through invitations that never came. Through updates I learned about online instead of through direct conversation. Harper stopped sharing details unless it was absolutely necessary. Mom checked in mostly around holidays. Dad never asked how I was managing or whether I felt close to exhaustion some months. There was no official separation, just a slow drift that felt deliberate even if no one admitted it out loud. I began noticing that I was no longer included in the real moments. Photos would appear before explanations. Decisions would be finalized before I heard about them. Plans would unfold without my input, as if my presence had shifted from expected to optional, and eventually from optional to inconvenient. When I did visit, the imbalance felt sharper than before. Conversations moved around me instead of toward me. Stories were halfway told before I sat down. My chair felt like something added at the last second rather than prepared in advance. I measured my words carefully, making sure I didn't interrupt a rhythm that had never been designed with me in mind. Harper would speak confidently about her progress, her plans, her next steps. The room leaned toward her naturally. I leaned back. Financially, I never fell behind. I made sure of that. I learned how to stretch a paycheck, how to negotiate small expenses, how to fix minor problems myself instead of paying someone else. Independence stopped feeling like an achievement and started feeling like survival. And over time, the emotional distance became normal. I stopped waiting for calls. I stopped interpreting silence as temporary. I stopped assuming that if someone hadn't reached out, it was because they were busy rather than choosing absence. That shift hurt at first, then it hardened into acceptance. I trained myself not to need validation from them. Needing it only made the quiet louder. What surprised me most was how peaceful my small apartment felt compared to the larger house I grew up in. There was no tension humming beneath conversations, no invisible hierarchy shaping every interaction, just stillness, my own schedule, my own choices. No one clapped for my progress. No one praised my consistency. But for the first time, my accomplishments felt real because they weren't measured against someone else's spotlight. I learned how to cook simple meals and sit with them without distraction. I learned how to spend a Sunday organizing my space without worrying whether I was being productive enough for someone else's standards. I learned how to exist without constantly adjusting my tone. The drift from my family became so gradual that it almost felt natural, like we were all silently agreeing that this was easier. They didn't have to manage my sensitivity. I didn't have to navigate their preference. And yet there was still one day each year that pulled me back in: Christmas. It was the only time the house tried to feel whole again. Lights, decorations, coordinated gatherings, an illusion of warmth that for a few hours made me wonder if maybe things could reset. That year when the invitation came, it didn't feel enthusiastic. It felt expected, routine. But I went anyway, because even when you've learned to live without belonging, part of you still hopes that maybe this time something will feel different. That Christmas night arrived quietly, almost deceptively so. From the outside, the house looked warm. Lights wrapped around the porch railing. The tree inside glowed through the front window, soft gold against the dark street. If anyone had driven past, they would have seen a picture-perfect holiday, a family gathered, a celebration in progress. But warmth, I had learned, doesn't always reach everyone standing in the room. When I stepped inside, the living room was already arranged like a stage. Wrapping paper shimmered under the lights. Ornaments reflected every movement. There was a hum in the air, not chaotic, not messy, but controlled, anticipatory, as if something important had already been decided and we were simply waiting for the right moment to unveil it. Mom stood near the tree with a kind of contained excitement that looked practiced. Dad positioned himself slightly behind her. Steady, composed, Harper sat close, back straight, hands folded loosely in her lap. She didn't look surprised. She looked ready. No one told me where to sit. That detail might sound small, but in our house, it never was. Placement meant belonging. Preparation meant importance. I found a chair near the edge of the room and settled in, quietly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my sweater. The first gift wasn't small, it was large, wrapped in deep, glossy paper that reflected the tree lights like a mirror. The kind of wrapping chosen carefully, smooth, deliberately. It was carried forward with almost ceremonial care and placed directly in front of Harper. The room stilled. Mom's voice lifted just slightly, not loud enough to seem dramatic, but high enough to command attention. Dad nodded toward the gift as if granting permission. Harper's hands moved slowly at first, peeling back the paper in controlled motions, as though she already understood that whatever was inside would justify the suspense. When the box opened and the keys appeared in her palm, there was a split second of silence. Then recognition. Not confusion, not disbelief. Recognition. The keys were heavy, metallic, unmistakable. Harper stared at them as if confirming something she had long suspected. Dad's voice broke through steady and measured. A house. A brand new house. The air shifted immediately. Gasps, laughter. A rising swell of pride that filled every corner of the room. Mom stepped forward, touching Harper's shoulder, eyes shining in a way I had rarely seen directed anywhere else. Harper stood hugging them both, the keys pressed between them like proof. Before the noise could settle, Dad added something else, almost casually, as if it were simply another logical extension of the moment. There was more. Outside, when he mentioned the car, a brand new Tesla waiting in the driveway, the room erupted again. Someone rushed to the window. Someone laughed louder than necessary. Harper's composure cracked just enough to reveal pure satisfaction. Not shock, satisfaction. It felt less like a surprise and more like a coronation. Everyone moved toward the door in a wave of excitement. I followed a few steps behind, watching as Harper stepped outside, the cold air barely registering against the heat of celebration. The car's headlights flashed when she pressed the key. The sleek shape gleamed under the porch light. It fit her perfectly. Mom wrapped her arms around Harper again. Dad stood slightly apart, hands in his coat pockets, nodding with quiet approval like an architect admiring a finished project. There was pride in his posture, ownership. When we went back inside, the energy remained high. Voices overlapped. Plans were discussed immediately. Move-in dates, interior design, color choices, features. The future was already unfolding around her. Then eventually someone remembered me. It wasn't unkind, just procedural. Mom reached for a smaller box, already set aside. The paper wasn't glossy, the bow wasn't elaborate. She handed it to me with a quick smile that didn't linger long enough to anchor anything meaningful. My turn. I felt every pair of eyes flick toward me briefly, not with curiosity, but with the expectation that this would be quick. I opened the wrapping carefully, the sound of paper tearing far louder in my ears than it actually was. Inside, resting flat and thin against the cardboard, was a $2 lottery ticket. That was it. No explanation, no playful build-up, no story attached. Just a small, fragile piece of paper. The room didn't react. There was no laughter, no awkward apology, no attempt to soften the contrast. Conversation resumed almost instantly, flowing back toward Harper's house and car, as if my moment had been a commercial break in the main event. I held the ticket between my fingers. It felt lighter than it should have, and somehow heavier too. Not because of its value. $2 doesn't carry weight, but because of what it represented. Harper had been handed stability, movement, proof that her future was being built for her. I had been handed chance, thin paper instead of solid keys, possibility instead of certainty. And what struck me most wasn't the gift itself. It was the comfort with which it had been given, the absolute ease in their body language, the lack of hesitation. They weren't worried about how it looked. They weren't concerned about balance. They were confident I would accept it, confident I would smile, say thank you, and return to my seat quietly. And I did smile. I always knew how to play my part. But something inside me shifted, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet click into place, a confirmation of everything I had spent years trying to rationalize away. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't oversight. It was alignment. This was my position. I stood slowly smoothing my sweater again, still holding the ticket. No one asked where I was going. No one paused the conversation. The rhythm of celebration never broke. I walked toward the front door, the laughter behind me, blending into a soft hum. When I stepped outside, the cold air felt cleaner, honest. It didn't pretend to be warm. I closed the door gently behind me. The house remained bright. Voices carried faintly through the walls. The street ahead was quiet, almost empty. For a moment, I stood there, the thin ticket pressed between my fingers, and let the silence settle around me. What hurt wasn't the money. It was the certainty. And with that certainty resting quietly in my chest, I walked away. Delaney didn't buy the second ticket out of impulse. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even hope. It was habit. On her way home from work, 2 days after Christmas, she stopped at the same small convenience store she'd been using for years. Same fluorescent lights, same tired hum of refrigeration units, same rack of brightly colored lottery slips near the counter. She stood there for a moment, coat still buttoned, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the display. She didn't think about Harper. She didn't think about the house keys or the Tesla. She didn't think about the room going silent when she unfolded that thin paper square. She just bought a ticket. The clerk handed it over with a nod. No ceremony, no symbolism, just a transaction. At home, she placed the ticket on her kitchen table beside her laptop. She made tea first. She took off her coat. She changed into comfortable clothes. There was something deliberate in the slowness, as if she was proving to herself that nothing had changed yet. Then she opened the lottery app on her phone. She scanned the barcode. The screen froze for half a second. Then it flashed a message that didn't register at first. Jackpot winner. She frowned slightly, assuming it was a glitch. She refreshed the page, closed the app, opened it again, scanned the ticket a second time. The same message. Her eyes moved down to the number displayed beneath it. $90 million. There wasn't a gasp. There wasn't a scream. No trembling hands. She stared at it the way she might stare at a typo in a report. Calm, analytical, suspicious. She opened the official lottery website on her laptop, checked the drawn numbers manually, one by one. Her numbers matched. Every single one. She pulled the ticket closer under the kitchen light as if the ink might shift if she looked long enough. It didn't. $90 million. Her first clear thought wasn't excitement. It was, this needs to be handled correctly. She set her phone down deliberately, face down like she was putting distance between herself and the noise the world would make if it knew. She felt something steady settle inside her, not disbelief, not even joy. ownership. For the first time in her life, something immense had landed in her hands, with no comparison attached. No hierarchy, no correction, no reminder to wait her turn. She didn't post about it. She didn't text anyone. She didn't call her parents. She didn't even allow herself the indulgence of imagining their faces. Instead, she reached for her contacts and scrolled to a name she had added years ago when she first started investing modestly. Harold Bennett, her financial advisor. He answered on the third ring. "Delaney, I need to schedule an urgent meeting," she said calmly. There was a pause on the line. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," she replied. "Very much so. I believe I've just won the lottery." Silence. Then professional composure clicked into place on his end. "How much?" 90 million. Another pause, longer this time, but not chaotic. Measured. "Have you signed the ticket?" "No." "Good. Do not sign it yet." His tone shifted into structure immediately. That was why she trusted him. No dramatic congratulations, no exclamations, just systems. "First," he continued, "we confirm through official channels without public filing. Second, we discuss whether you're in a state that allows anonymous claims. Third, we create a legal entity before the ticket is claimed." "A trust?" she asked. "Likely. Or an LLC layered under a trust. We'll decide after reviewing state regulations. You need privacy, asset protection, and tax planning in place before anyone knows your name." Delaney leaned back in her chair, listening carefully. This felt familiar. Planning, process, deliberation. "Do not tell anyone," Harold added. "Not family, not friends, not co-workers. The fewer people who know, the more control you retain." Control. That word landed gently but firmly. "I haven't told anyone," she said. "Good. Bring the ticket to my office tomorrow morning. We'll secure it immediately. Until then, store it somewhere safe. A fireproof box if you have one." "I do." "Excellent. And Delaney?" "Yes." "Congratulations," quietly. A faint smile touched her mouth. "Thank you, Harold." She ended the call and sat there for a while in the stillness of her apartment. The radiator hummed softly. Outside, a car drove past. The world continued at the same volume it always had. $90 million. She didn't feel bigger. She didn't feel louder. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt clear. The house keys on Christmas had been presented like a coronation. Applause, gasps, pride spilling from every corner of the room. This moment had none of that. Just her. Just the truth glowing softly on a screen. She retrieved the small fireproof lockbox from the back of her closet and placed the unsigned ticket inside, locked it, tested the latch twice. Then she made another cup of tea. No champagne, no music, no late-night spending fantasies. Instead, she opened a blank document on her laptop and began outlining what she wanted her life to look like. Not louder, not flashier, but intentional. Philanthropy, investments, stability, space. For the first time, the future felt like something she could design without negotiating for scraps of approval. She wasn't thinking about proving anything. She wasn't thinking about showing anyone. She was thinking about stewardship. When she finally went to bed, she didn't lie awake in disbelief. She slept the way she always did, on her side, one arm under the pillow, breathing slow and steady. In the morning, the world would still not know. And that, more than the money, felt powerful. It didn't start with a headline. It started with a conversation behind a counter. The convenience store clerk had recognized Delaney when she came back the morning after scanning the ticket. Calm, composed, asking a quiet, procedural question about claim verification. She hadn't announced anything. She hadn't celebrated. But there had been something in her stillness that lingered. And when the clerk checked the terminal later that day and saw the confirmation tied to that transaction, restraint dissolved into excitement. By evening, he had told his cousin. By the next morning, his cousin had told a friend. By lunch, someone had connected a last name. Brooks. It moved. The way gossip always moves, soft at first, then sharpened by speculation. Someone mentioned that Delaney Brooks had been in the store that day. Someone else remembered Harper's recent Christmas post showing off house keys and a new car. The contrast was irresistible. By the third day, Harper's phone lit up with a message from a friend. Is your sister the one who won the 90 million Talhesatigo? Harper didn't call immediately. She texted first. Delaney was in Harold's office reviewing paperwork when her phone vibrated. She glanced down at the screen. Harper. Hey, random question. Did you buy a lottery ticket recently? The tone was light, casual, artificially airy. Delaney didn't respond. Minutes later, another message. People are saying someone with our last name won big. That's crazy, lol. Still nothing. Then the call came. She let it go to voicemail. Harper left a message, her voice tight beneath forced humor. Okay, this is weird. Call me back. By that evening, Mom called. Her tone was different, carefully measured curiosity. Sweetheart, she began. We've been hearing something unusual. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, but your sister says there are rumors. Delaney listened without interrupting. Did you win something? The word something hung there, fragile and loaded. Delaney could hear Dad in the background asking what she was saying. She didn't answer the question. I'm handling my affairs, she said evenly. There's nothing you need to worry about. Silence stretched on the other end. Mom tried again, softer now. Delaney, if something significant has happened, or we're your family, we deserve to know. Deserve. There it was. Not curiosity anymore. Claim. I'm fine, Delaney replied. That's all. She ended the call before the conversation could tilt. The next morning, Dad called directly. No softness, no cushioning. Is it true, he asked without greeting. Delaney remained quiet, long enough that he filled the silence himself. We're getting calls. People are asking questions. If you've won that kind of money, we need to discuss what that means for the family. For the family. The phrasing shifted again away from her and toward collective entitlement. It's not appropriate for you to shut us out of something this big, he continued. We've supported you your whole life. Supported. The word slid into place like it had been waiting for years. Delaney felt the old instinct rise, the one that wanted to explain, to soothe, to justify her choices, so the room would stay calm. She didn't use it. There's nothing to discuss, she said quietly. Dad exhaled sharply. Don't be childish. If you've come into money that affects all of us, affects. As if her life had always been a shared asset. When she didn't respond, he pressed harder. Your sister just bought a house. We're still helping with expenses. If you're sitting on that kind of windfall, it's selfish not to step up. Step up! The language no longer pretended to be neutral. It was structured expectation now. Assumption layered into obligation. Delaney didn't argue the facts. She didn't defend the legitimacy of a ticket she had purchased with her own money. She didn't remind him of Christmas morning. Silence had once been survival. Now it was boundary. By afternoon, Harper called again, this time without pretense. So it's true, she said immediately. No greeting, no softness. You won. Delaney didn't confirm. Harper laughed a sharp, incredulous sound. Wow. Okay. And you weren't gonna tell us. You found out, Delaney said evenly. That's not the point. It was always the point. You don't just disappear with $90 million, Harper continued. That's family-level money. That's generational. Family level. The phrasing crystallized the shift completely. In their voices, the ticket was no longer hers. It was communal property waiting to be redistributed according to the hierarchy that had always existed. Mom called again that night, more emotional now. We've done so much for you, she said, voice trembling. This could change everything for all of us. Don't shut us out. All of us. The repetition felt intentional. Delaney stood in her kitchen, phone in hand, and watched the city lights flicker beyond her window. She felt the pressure building, not explosive, but tightening. Like hands slowly closing around something they believed already belonged to them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't counter their math with her own. She didn't remind them who had received a house and a Tesla wrapped in applause. She let the silence answer. By the end of the week, the calls were no longer requests. They were demands for a meeting. We need to sit down, Dad insisted in his final voicemail. This can't be handled over the phone. The expectation was no longer implied. It was moving toward confrontation. And for the first time in her life, Delaney did not feel the urge to shrink to keep the peace. She simply waited. The meeting was scheduled like a negotiation. Sunday afternoon, 4 o'clock. The dining room table cleared of its usual decorations, polished to a quiet shine. Mom had set out water glasses no one touched. Dad sat at the head of the table as if this were a boardroom instead of a home. Harper arrived last, confident, composed, dressed like someone stepping into a conversation she expected to win. Delaney took the remaining seat without ceremony. No one asked how she was. Dad began. We're not here to argue, he said, which meant they were. We're here to clarify expectations. Expectations. Harper leaned back in her chair, arms loosely folded. This doesn't have to be complicated, she added. We're family. The word landed heavily rehearsed. Mom tried a softer angle. Sweetheart, no one is saying you don't deserve good fortune, but $90 million is bigger than one person. It changes what's possible for all of us. All of us. Delaney listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't challenge the math or the assumption built into their phrasing that her life, her money, her luck existed in shared custody. Dad slid a legal pad across the table. On it were columns of handwritten numbers. We've outlined reasonable distributions, he said. Investments for the family, assistance for Harper's mortgage, college funds for future grandchildren, a trust structure that benefits everyone. Harper smiled, slightly reassured by the visible plan. It's not like you'd even feel the difference, she said lightly. You'd still be insanely rich. The word insanely was almost playful. Delaney reached into her coat pocket. For the first time, her movement drew real attention. She placed a single folded slip of paper in the center of the table. The $2 ticket, the one Harper had given her on Christmas morning. It looked smaller now under the overhead light. Thinner, insignificant. Dad frowned. What is this? You gave this to me? Delaney said, calmly looking at Harper. Harper blinked. It was a joke. I know. Silence crept in. Delaney folded her hands neatly in front of her. The winning ticket was not this one. The words were steady, unadorned. Harper's expression shifted confusion, first, then calculation. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying... Delaney replied evenly. The ticket I purchased myself is the one that won. The room stilled. Mom's hand moved slowly to her mouth. Dad's jaw tightened. Harper leaned forward. So you're admitting it. I'm clarifying it, Delaney corrected softly. Dad's voice sharpened. That doesn't change anything. The money still belongs in this family. There it was again. Ownership by proximity. Delaney shook her head once, not defensive, not angry. No, she said, it doesn't. Harper's composure cracked first. You wouldn't even have been thinking about lottery tickets if I hadn't given you that one, she snapped. You were in the mindset because of me. Delaney met her eyes. I've been buying my own tickets for years. That's not the point, Harper shot back, her voice rising. We supported you. We raised you. You don't just walk away with $90 million like we're strangers. The old script. Obligation, gratitude, debt. Delaney felt the familiar pull to explain herself. Dissolve before it could form. I didn't walk away with anything that was yours, she said quietly. You gave me this. She nudged the $2 ticket slightly forward across the table. If it wins, she added gently, good luck next time. The sentence landed like a clean cut. Harper's face flushed, deep red. Are you serious? She demanded. You're going to throw us scraps after everything. I'm not throwing anything, Delaney replied. I'm keeping what is mine. Dad stood abruptly, chair scraping against hardwood. This is selfish, he said flatly. Disgraceful. Mom's eyes filled, but there was no apology in them, only disappointment that the hierarchy wasn't being honored. Delaney rose slowly. She felt no tremor in her hands, no spike of adrenaline, just clarity. I hope you all find what you're looking for, she said. Harper laughed bitterly. You'll regret this. Delaney paused at the doorway. No, she answered softly. I won't. She didn't slam the door when she left. She didn't look back. And for the first time in her life, walking away didn't feel like exile. It felt permanent. The aftermath wasn't explosive. It was quiet. The calls stopped first, then the texts, then even the indirect messages through relatives faded into awkward silence. There was no dramatic disowning, no public scandal, just distance settling in like dust after something fragile had shattered. Harper's life, however, did not adjust as smoothly. A house and a Tesla came with maintenance, insurance, property taxes, real numbers that didn't shrink just because applause had once surrounded them. Without the expectation of Delaney, stepping in the financial strain began to show. Subtle at first, then visible in small complaints online about unexpected expenses and timing. The tone shifted from celebration to pressure. Delaney saw some of it. She didn't engage. She didn't gloat. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt removed. Her parents' authority, once so absolute, lost its weight in her absence. They could no longer correct her, advise her, or reposition her within the family narrative. Without access to her life, their influence simply stopped reaching her. And Delaney did not rush to fill the silence. Instead, she built something smaller. Not louder, not showier. Smaller, she moved into a modest, light-filled home under the protection of a trust Harold had structured carefully. No mansion, no gates, just space that belonged entirely to her. She kept her routines, morning coffee by the window, work. She chose not because she needed the income, but because she valued the rhythm. Private investments handled methodically. Quiet philanthropy routed through channels that kept her name off buildings. She discovered something unexpected in those months. Peace did not need witnesses. There were no victory speeches, no revenge spending, no dramatic reinvention. Just boundaries held. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like she was standing at the edge of someone else's celebration. There was no hierarchy in her home, no comparison, no subtle corrections. If Harper struggled, Delaney did not celebrate it. She didn't feel satisfaction watching someone else feel the pressure she once carried. That would have meant she was still orbiting the same gravity. She wasn't. The real shift wasn't the money. It was the understanding that survival had quietly turned into freedom. She hadn't kept the money to punish anyone. She had kept it because it was hers. And in choosing not to argue, not to explain, not to rescue, she had finally chosen herself. Not as rebellion, as self-respect. Sometimes choosing yourself doesn't look loud or dramatic. It looks like a quiet boundary, a calm no, a door closed without slamming it. Delaney didn't win because of the money she won, because she stopped shrinking for approval and started standing in her own life. If her story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're walking your own path toward peace, stay with us. You're not alone here.